Amazing. Okay, Paul, thank you ever so much for joining me today on the International Classroom podcast. Just as one of the questions I found myself starting off with when I speak to everyone, whereabouts in the world do we find you today?
Sure. I'm down in Tasmania, which is the southernmost part of Australia. This is God's country down here, Alex. I love it. I was born here, raised here, and I'll happily die here, hopefully in a long time from now. But yeah, I'm very passionate about Tasmania.
Sound like almost one of those. Unfortunately, sometimes I get a stereotypical view of Australians, having spent quite a bit of time with them here in Dubai as well. Very, very country proud there.
Yeah, we love it. We love it. There's certain parts of our country that are less proud, but I'm one of those people who thinks patriotism is a virtue, and I'm a big fan of Australia, and specifically Tasmania. I've heard it's like Texas, Alex. People from America say they're from America, but people from Texas say Texas. You know, and the same with Australia and Tasmania. Everyone else says they're Australian, but if you meet a bloke from Tasmania, he'll tell you straight away, I'm from Tasmania.
Yeah, that sounds very much like my father-in-law, actually. So they're Yorkshire, and obviously in Yorkshire as well, it's known as God's country. And they'll say, when you ask someone, it's like, oh, so, where are you from? They'll be like, Yorkshire. Not even England. It's like, yeah, I'm Yorkshire. So a lot of things in common there, So tell us a little bit about your backstory, because obviously we want to talk about education. So where did you start in the world of education?
I'm a really passionate educator. I actually started, would you believe, Alex, 3 generations ago. So I'm a 3rd generation educator. My dad was a teacher. His dad was a teacher. And all 3 of my brothers are teachers as well. So education, in many ways, it was an element of fatalism. I was always going to be an educator, but it's a good thing that I love it so much. So I'm a high school history teacher at an independent school down here in Tasmania. At least I was, until I took a step back from the classroom and have now moved full-time into the AI and education space.
Okay, so what inspired or even motivated you to come out of the classroom and go into then almost this essence of consultancy work?
It's interesting. I always say there must be some divine sense of humour, because I was walking around proudly telling everyone that I was going to finish working, I was going to retire at the school that I started teaching at. It's actually the school that I went to high school at. It's called Calvin Christian School. I was a teacher there, and my grandparents helped found the school. I love it. I was very passionate. As I said, a very passionate educator, and that's really what drove me into AI. Believe it or not, although I'm now full-time in the AI space with a startup and a consultancy, I don't get too excited about technology. What I really get excited about, Alex, is teachers and students. And that's what makes me excited about AI, not the tech, but the impact it'll have on teachers and the impact it'll have on students if we're wise about how we implement it. So that's really the same thing that was making me so passionate about education as a teacher, which is inspiring the next generation and changing and shaping lives. That's really the same passion, the same engine that's driving me as I have this software startup and my consultancy now. I think AI can do a great deal of good if we approach it wisely, and that's what I'm committing myself to doing now.
It's a notable cause. It's interesting when you said that. Like, there's numerous people I've spoken with who are using like AI or talk about ed tech, and then in their personal lives, they're like, "Oh, you expect them to be like, no, don't go near it, don't really touch it, not bothered about it." It's like, really? It almost seems like a bit of an oxymoron to some extent in that respect. But you mentioned something there that I really want to dive into, is this term about impact. And AI's impact on teachers' role, on teacher roles, as it were. So, just can you unpack that a little bit for us in terms of where you are seeing and where you think it's going to go to in terms of the impact it can have for teachers?
Yeah, I'm really, really excited about what artificial intelligence is going to do for teachers. And if we're honest, November 2022, ChatGPT comes out. It doesn't meet the teaching profession in a very good place. What do I mean by that? The profession in Australia, at least, is in crisis. So the burnout rate of educators is eye-watering, and I've got every reason to expect that it's the same around the globe. When we go to local schools or international schools, what do we see? We see teachers are having an increasingly hard time with their job. The expectations upon teachers are getting higher and higher and higher. The needs in the classroom are getting more and more diverse, and as we understand more about human beings and what makes them learn and helps them learn, that a lot of that extra legwork is falling back on the teacher. And that's where I think the opportunity for artificial intelligence is for educators, is actually to help tired teachers. There's so many basic administrative duties as a teacher. And let's be honest, no one gets into the education profession to get down to inbox zero and make sure that they've got all their grades uploaded to the online learning management system. It's all this low-level admin that's actually driving people out of the profession when they got in the profession to inspire the next generation. So here's what I'm really hopeful for, Alex. This is my big, lofty goal for artificial intelligence in education. It's that we can get AI to do the things that it can do, the low-level admin, so that we can get back to doing the things that only we can do, which is inspiring the next generation of learners. And that's why I'm so excited about AI and education. And that's the vision I'm trying to cast through my consulting. It's something I'm trying to yell from the rooftops. I think it'll actually free us up for education to be more human than it has been for a long, long time.
Yeah, a lot of people who are currently working in AI a lot and advocating for it of really go through this concept of human flourishing and human connection and connectivity and actually going back to being human. So what you're kind of talking about there sounds, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but like we want to be using AI to do more automation for us.
I think so. There's a lot of tasks that teachers do on a regular basis which can be automated through AI, and it's not at the detriment of the teacher, and it is to the benefit of the student. And if you ask me, that's a win-win-win. Okay, so we can outsource the things that were costing us our evenings, weekends and holidays, and we're able then to provide great tailored personalised learning to our students and do that while we're not sacrificing our self-care. We can care for our students and not have to stop caring for ourselves at the same time. And that has been a trade-off teachers have been making for a very, very long time. Let me tell you my vision. My big vision for AI in education, because there's a lot of teachers who will be listening to this podcast and they'll be quite sceptical. And the reason is there's a fatal misconception at the heart of their understanding of AI. They think they have to use new technology to do new things. Right? So they might have seen someone on LinkedIn saying, oh, I got my students talking with AI Plato or AI Shakespeare. And, that's a whole lot of fun and that's pretty cool. But that also makes some teachers feel quite nervous. They feel like the pedagogical bag that they've been putting techniques into for the last couple of decades, they feel like they have to put that in the bin and start over with new tech. Actually, my vision for AI in education is not brand new pedagogies, but just doing the basics better. Doing things like differentiating text so that every learner in our classroom can decode the text. We can do that. We can differentiate it to 5 levels in 1 minute at massive benefit, right? And we've known that that's a huge needle-moving, evidence-based practice. But for teachers, it's just been a low-value proposition, spending half an hour differentiating a text that's going to take 10 minutes to read, so we often don't do it. So that's my big idea here. It's not brand new pedagogies, it's actually better basics. We can do the things that we know make the difference for students, but we can do them with far greater frequency for far bigger benefits for our students.
Pause on that. One child needs help. There you go. All done. You're welcome. Oh, no. It wouldn't be a podcast episode if I wasn't interrupted in some way, shape or form. So please don't worry about it.
I respect your demeanour during those things. Sometimes, I got a 3-year-old, a 2-year-old and a 6-month-old. And if I'm in the flow and something happens, man, I tell you, I would like to say I was as cool as you just were, but I'm often not.
It obviously shows how accustomed and used to it I am, how frequently it happens. But going back to it, I absolutely love, and I've written that down in terms of what you're saying, because, and also it's something you're a massive advocate for. I've seen a lot on LinkedIn in terms of this better basics, and the conversations that are having around this. Like, we're often swept up with, look at Sora, look at Udio, look at, these ones that are now coming through with music generation, with video generation, and the possibilities of looking forward that we often stop, or we don't stop, should I say, to actually go, well, hang on a minute. Where are we at right now, and how can I use this to be better? This concept of disruption, and I hear this word around a lot, and I've started to go off the word a little bit, but this forward thinking too much about just, let's really disrupt everything. It's like, well, hang on a minute. Like, what do we want to keep? What is it that the essence of that makes me a great teacher or a great learner, that I can bring with me? This term you use, pedagogical bag. Well, what can I take from this pedagogical bag with me into this sort of new and exciting part of how to use AI? So I think you're right in terms of what you're saying then, educators. It's this idea of like just overwhelmed and being slightly scared, but love what you're saying about that in terms of just better basics. And and how you've described in terms of what we can do with it in a classroom. So, I mean, for you, you are going into schools more. You're now speaking with teachers. You're getting to see these things happen day in, day out. Like, what are some of the specific ways that AI could be used to assist teachers in terms of learning and engaging students?
That is the right question, Alex. So I commend you for that, because we want to be showing teachers, again, many of them are coming quite skeptical because they've had new learning management system after new learning management system forced on them. They've had to move from their physical teacher chronicle to another online, they're just sick of it. They're sick of the new tech because it takes up so much of their brain space. So I understand that there are many teachers coming to this AI space with change fatigue, and they're quite frustrated. So what I do when I start my consulting with schools, what I don't do is I say, this is what artificial intelligence is. This is a timeline of AI. These are your keywords, because I can actually see people starting to fall asleep. Yeah. So I don't worry about that. Here's what I do. I say, here is a reading. It's a reading I use in grade 9 history. Here is that same reading differentiated down to a grade 5, a grade 3 level, and a dot point level. Here is a low stakes retrieval practice quiz based on that reading that I'm going to give every student. And here is a task, and here is a specific rubric for that task based on the reading. And I did that in 5 minutes. That's what I do. And if anyone's done any sales, they'll notice that that's benefit-led selling. Here's the benefits. But crucially, the benefits aren't just for us teachers, they're for our students. And that's really what teachers want. We're driven by empathy. We want to make a difference in the lives of our students. And so I say, here, those evidence-based practice. We're talking rubrics, we're talking retrieval practice, we're talking text leveling. You can do those for your students. You can do it in 3 minutes. And let me tell you this, Alex, a lot of teachers are tech hesitant, but not too many teachers out there are benefit hesitant. And I find that really helps them understand the possibilities of AI in their classroom.
Yeah, I think even just thinking back from my own experiences that we're still having in school, a colleague of mine, whenever we have to do data entry, we've got so many different systems, and he just makes this constant joke about, just copying data from one place to another place, then am I? And you can see when you speak to so many teachers, it's like, so do you use Google or do you use Microsoft? Okay, so there's one side of teaching. Now, where do you keep all your data? We're on Cicero. We use this instead. We're on iSAMS. We use, and it just goes on, doesn't it? So that concept of change fatigue that you mentioned, and even just being overwhelmed and burnt out by just the sheer number of systems is something I can empathize with in that respect. What I find most interesting then in terms of picking out there this idea of benefits, and it's I kind of think of it as layers now, because I'm seeing benefits for teachers, like in terms of pedagogical practice, lesson design, curriculum design. But the next step with that is then, how do we get this to benefit students? And you kind of mentioned it from a teacher's perspective, but what does that look like in terms of student use? And I'll kind of, I'll tie into the next part, because there's also this concern of ethics after that, isn't there? But what would you say in terms of good practice, or, even onto beneficial practice, looks like for students?
There's a few ideas I want to put out there and then tie together. So it's going to look like a random scatterbrain approach, but really there's going to be a point where they all twist together. First big idea, students are bad at tech. Students are bad at tech. Controversial. We think they're good. We call them digital natives. That's probably not a great word to use. They're great at playing Roblox and Fortnite.
Great with these.
Yeah, that's right. They're good at phones. They're good at consuming a lot of stuff. But actually, their basic technological know-how and skills is not so good. So that's an idea we need to keep in our mind. Because what does it mean when they get on an AI, and they all will? But that's my second point. I'll get there in a sec. What does it mean? I think it means they'll default to using it badly. They'll say, write me my essay. It's not good. How could they use it better? Well, they could say, here is my essay, give me some feedback, critique it for logical cohesion, vocabulary, make sure it's well structured and ordered, and my word choice is good. So instead of using it, and this is why I called my first ebook on this topic, AI Cheater or Tutor, because it's a dichotomy. It could be used as a methodology to cheat, or it could be used as a personal tutor. Now, as I said, I fear, Alex, students will default towards unhelpful and unwise uses. That's why we have to train them. People say, oh no, and this is the second idea. People say we can't train students to use AI because we don't want them using it. We don't want to be responsible for that. But student use of AI is not an if question, but a how question. Not an if question, but a how question. It's not if they'll use it, it's how they'll use it. They will use it. They absolutely. AI is now infused within, underneath, and on top of everything that's out there. Back in November 2022, you could block one website and no one would have access. Those days are long gone. That ship has sailed. So students will be using it. That's not up to us. But it is up to us how wisely they will be using it. And that's why I'm a big advocate of training people to use AI. We must show our students how. We expect that we will have to show our students how to do every other part of life that we're training them to do. Why not this too? All right? I think it's actually part of our duty as educators to equip students to live in the world in which they're living. And part of that is now an AI-infused world. So we need to show them how to do it if we want them to use it well. There's no sense walking around the staff room, lighting your hair on fire, saying, why are all my students cheating on their essays, when we've never actually taught them a more beneficial use case of AI. So I think that's really, really important. And that's controversial. Not everyone is excited about student using AI. But as I said, the cat's out of the bag. The toothpaste is out of the tube. They're going to be using it. That's not up to us. How well they use it, however, is up to us.
Yeah, completely agree. I'm moving schools in August, and one of my students turned around to me on Monday and said, sir, when you leave, will we still get to use this MindJoy program that we use? And I was like, no, sorry, because obviously I'd set it up with them and I do this with them, and they're like, And it makes you realize then, and even just having these conversations, that the implementation of it, the student use of it, is still small. It's still in a small cluster of teachers in a global perspective, or even for me in a UAE perspective, who are teaching students how to use it. And for me, is a big difference. I think you go into any classroom now, and the majority of secondary students will use it, are using it in the classroom.
Yeah.
And that's not a teacher training them, showing them. It's just they're using it for the task. And I think that's the big difference in terms of how, and you mentioned that, how we get students to use it. So providing those tasks, providing, opportunities to upskill themselves with using AI, I think is super, super important. But it's also challenging, isn't it?
It is challenging. It is challenging. So we have to equip educators with the use cases to give students so that they can use it wisely. Because it's all nice to talk on a broad ethereal level about how students could use it for their benefit, perhaps. But what would they actually be using it for? It's a good question. I think one of the things that we should get students using AI for is as a feedback generation machine. Now, this is not to replace the teacher, it's to help the teacher. In my classroom, there's 25 students and there's one of me. And that means even if I want to spend 1 minute talking with every student, I'm probably only going to make it round once in a period. I'm a high school teacher. We've got 40 minutes. By the time I've explained the task at one end and then wrapped up the task at the other end, I might only make it round to every student once. And let's be honest, as teachers, we know there might be some lessons where some students are not getting much from us in terms of personalised, tailored feedback. Students can take on a lot more feedback than we're able to give. So that's a perfect use case for AI. There's a very interesting, to couch this within a philosophical and evidence-based system. One of the seminal educational studies it was 1984, it was done by Benjamin Bloom, the same fellow who gave us Bloom's taxonomy. He did a study and he called the paper the Two Sigma problem. And he was comparing the efficacy of different ways of teaching. And he compared in this study one-on-one tutoring to a conventional class, and the conventional class is 30 students, one teacher. And what did he find? He found students who were one-on-one tutored were 2 standard deviations better in their learning. They had advanced 2 standard deviations of growth in their learning compared to the conventional class. Now, that's an eye-watering difference. That's a huge effect. And the paper was called the Two Sigma problem because they were, in maths, a sigma is a standard deviation. However, it was called the Two Sigma problem because he said, hey, look, we just can't get those benefits for every kid. Right? Although we know the huge benefits of tutoring, we know that it's out of our reach for every student. And what I often tell schools at this point is, friends, the Two Sigma problem has now become a Two Sigma possibility. We can put students in a targeted, personalised, feedback-rich environment if we train them to use AI well. We can get at giving them feedback on a micro level. What do you think of this sentence? What do you think of this paragraph? Can you analyse it against these 3 criteria? Now I'm going to rephrase my sentence and rewrite my paragraph. What do you think now? Do you think I've made a positive change, and so on. So I think really our students stand to gain immensely if we're able to allow them to use AI as a tutor of sorts.
Yeah. And as you alluded to, that goes back to teachers feeling competent and confident, one in their own skills, but then how to use it. So if you were, let's say, imagine now you're speaking to a room full like you normally do, what would be the points that you would be advocating for and saying to them and showing them sort of those easy steps in to keep things simple of like, this is how you can upskill yourself, but also these are some of the simple ways that you can then start to implement this for students?
There's one key piece of philosophy that we need to lay down as a base coat when we're talking to educators. And that's it. As educators, you need to be willing to learn. That's really important. What do we expect our students to do every day when they come in our classrooms? Learn. Be vulnerable. Learn new things. What do we say when people say, oh, sir, I can't do maths. Oh, miss, I've never been good at writing. I'm not going to do it. We say, well, you can actually get better. Hard work and effort will be rewarded. You can learn. Whatever you put your hand to, you will get better at. It's that growth mindset stuff that's really taken education by storm. Yet, what are the same teachers who are spouting a lot of that growth mindset things? What do they say when confronted with AI so often? They say, I'm not a tech person. I'm not an early adopter. I don't do well with computers. Actually, that's the very same attitude that we're trying to extinguish in our students. And I'll put it to you, Alex, we're actually undermining our own credibility. If our students know that we expect them to come into the classroom every single day and be vulnerable and learn new things, yet we, in our actions, model an unwillingness to do the same thing, I think we're really cutting ourselves out at the legs. I don't think that's a good posture to adopt. So what do I say to teachers? I say, this is a great chance for you to embrace learning opportunities with humility, yet with confidence that your efforts will be rewarded. I don't want to see any of that fixed mindset that we so discourage in our students. So that's perhaps a harder word. I might couch that in slightly nicer, more flowery phraseology if the educators were right there in front of me, but that's the general gist. After that, I'd say the second big thing, once you've got the head right, get the hands right. Actually have a go. Have a play around with it. Because a lot of people are so scared. The people who I've met that are most fearful, most hesitant, have never actually had a go. And once they roll up the sleeves and get their hands dirty with a little bit of Copilot or ChatGPT, they realise they're not made out of glass, they're not going to break, and there are actually some interesting use cases. So get the head right, get the hands right, and then just try and do some things. Be led by your curiosity. Nothing is better. As I say, you can't learn to ride a bike at a seminar, okay? So there's only so much you can learn about AI when you're listening to a lecture. Actually have a crack yourself. I, as a general rule, when I'm running PD for schools, I ask for 2 hours and I try and leave at least the back 45 minutes for teachers just to crack open the laptop and have a play. I think once they develop some curiosity and are led by that curiosity and are able to be reflective on their practice and see where they've learned and think about the use cases for their classroom, I think they'll actually start to say, yeah, no, you know what? There are some fantastic benefits, not only for me, but for my learners here.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to approach it, especially like that, the hands-on side of things and learning from doing. So let's just say then you've got some people in front of you who are kind of a couple of steps beyond that, who are into using AI, feel comfortable, feel confident. You know, what would be then some of those innovative tools that you've been privy to that you kind of say for the more advanced teachers or practitioners? What would you be talking to them about and recommending on those scales that they could really get value from?
One of the things that I think it's important to do is earn your stripes with a basic large language model first. So understand the basics of prompting. I've just released an ebook. I'll flick you a link for that, Alex, for the show notes. It's called AI for Better Basics. We've already touched on the main theme, but it contains 3 basic principles and 3 basic practices that teachers can use AI for. So here are 3 basic ideas that you need to use it and 3 basic things you can do in your classroom. But I think one of the big things that we want to be able to do is learn how to prompt on a basic large language model. After that, when we look at specialised tools for education, one tool that I'm really, really excited about is My Teacher Aid. Now, I have to confess a slight conflict of interest here. I'm also the co-founder and CEO of My Teacher Aid. I do a lot of that when I'm not doing my consulting. But one of the key benefits of My Teacher Aid, and we're actually dealing with a number of schools in Dubai, as well as South Africa and Australia and India, is that we integrate the curriculum, and that's really key. Right, so we actually have a database of the curriculum within the tool. And what does that mean? It means you're not going to hallucinate your curriculum standards, and that's vital. Because if I went on ChatGPT and I said, can you please write me a detailed unit plan that's using version 9 of the Australian curriculum, it would say, absolutely I can. Roger that, let's do it. But what happens then? It hallucinates 95% of it. And then I'm actually in big trouble when the head of teaching and learning comes around and say, hey, Paul, this looks right, but on closer inspection, it's so far off. None of these content descriptors exist. What did you do? And so actually having a database of tools there, and not only tools but curriculum integration as well, is really crucial. So that's my teacher aid, and aid is spelled AIDE. There's kind of a word play there that doesn't come across so well over podcast. So I'm really excited about that, and we're doing a lot of good work over in the Middle East at the moment as well. However, I think there are other tools out there as well. Magic Schools AI is one that's really popular. Now, it doesn't have the curriculum integration, but it does have a lot of really interesting use cases. I've heard of Diffit as well, which is a fantastic resource that integrates artificial intelligence. But a lot of these tools that are designed for teachers are actually not necessarily the next level up in terms of sophistication. They're almost one level down. So it's actually a done for you. Someone has already primed the pump and trained the model to be educationally specific, trained it for the specific use case, whether it's rubric creation or lesson planning or these sorts of things. So I find the really astute, high-octane, experienced AI buffs, they can really get out of ChatGPT what any of these other tools would be able to produce. It's the everyday teacher who actually isn't excellent when it comes to embracing new technologies and learning to prompt and wrapping their head around new modalities. It's the average teacher who can actually use those teacher-specific solutions, those AI solutions, to get great results, not with a page and a half of delicate prompting, but just with a few bits of simple input and the click of a button. Does that make sense?
Yeah, very much so. I think I look at all these things that come out, and people approach me and speak to me about these different platforms and this, and I look at it and go, but I can generate the output using ChatGPT or using Claude or Gemini, and there was some of these conversations about, which one should you use? Who, it's like having your favorite football team, isn't it? It's like, and everyone's got a different favorite, but I think a lot of people use all 3, 4, 5 different LLMs, for different purposes, like whether it's connected to the internet, whether this one's better for, language side of things, writing side of things, data analysis type of things. They are starting to become a little niche. They're starting to specialize. And so, yeah, I completely understand in terms of where you're coming from there. And obviously then the impact and the benefit for teachers just starting out, if the prompt is done for you, and you can kind of just say, I want it for science, for this topic, for this, it is a lot easier for them, isn't it?
I think it is. And we have to be realistic here, because there's a lot of purists out there, and I see some of them on LinkedIn. You and I move in the same circles there, who go, no, any sort of tech startup aimed at any specific application of AI to an industry is nothing but a dirty money grab. And I would have to object vehemently to that. Actually, when we were creating My Teacher Aid, it was because my co-founder and I were sharing an office, and we were sitting next to an old bloke, and he would have been nearly in his 70s. He is an educator with a heart of gold, but he's just from a different era. He's from an era where you could do your lesson plan on a sticky note. He's from an era when you used to invite children with you on holidays, and you didn't have to fill out a stack of paperwork that came up to your waist. He's just from a different era, right? And he was one of the best educators we had, but what was the problem? Well, it looked like he wasn't long for the teaching profession because he just couldn't wrap his head around the administration. That just wasn't a big part of his training, wasn't a big part of his teaching practice. That's the educator that we designed My Teacher Aid for. In Tasmania, where I'm from, the average age of a teacher is over 50 years old. Now, of course, there are plenty of very competent over 50-year-olds with a tech. There's no doubt about that. But there are also plenty of great high-quality teachers out there who can barely keep their head above water with the administration. And at the moment, retirement is actually looking pretty good for them. Now, it's that sort of person who I think can benefit from a large language model that's been trained and focused and had the curriculum injected so that they can just get on with the job of teaching, and also then not have to learn a whole new raft of schools when it comes to trying to take a generic AI tool and target it for their specific niche.
Yeah. So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit with this one in terms of the My Teacher Aid you mentioned there, because one of obviously the big challenges, and there's always been a talking point with this then, is to do with ethics and bias. So as someone who is now teaching about AI, and as someone there as a co-founder with an AI product, how do you ensure that type of tool and the educational tools that we want to use are reflecting the viewpoints and mitigating risks of bias?
Let me draw out two ideas here. So firstly, when it comes to getting information that has should we call it a world view that you're looking for as a school, part of that can just be the prompt. So I know there are a lot of Islamic schools in the UAE. We could go, that could actually be built into a prompt that a school is using. Or if a school was using My Teacher Aid, for example, we don't deal with any Islamic schools at the moment. We deal with a bunch of Christian schools, independent Christian schools. And they say, hey, for us, it's really important that we would have a biblical perspective reflected within this. And that's actually quite easy to do. You do that in a prompt, and ChatGPT and OpenAI, which is the engine that runs ChatGPT, they're actually quite good at giving you information on that, and most large language models are. As a broader comment on bias in large language model AI, it definitely exists. There's no doubt about that. One thing that actually comforts me no end, Alex, is that every person from every end of the religious and political spectrum that I've ever talked to thinks that the bias is against them. So that is quite heartening. I mean, if it's biased against everyone, it's biased against no one. And it goes, okay, yeah, well, maybe some talk of bias that I keep hearing is actually a reflection on human condition and not on the condition of the large language model itself. But secondly, I'd say, yeah, well, look, it is bias. But you know what? I've taught from Year 9 history textbooks that are so biased they'll make your eyes water. Like, I can't pull up a journal article or a newspaper article or an editorial that's not biased. So what are we actually trying to do for our students here? Are we trying to put them in this hermetically sealed bubble where there's no bias seeping through? No, that's impossible to do. But what we can do is train them to see and encounter bias and make adjustments so that they can think about which bias they're seeing there, and they can then account for that bias in their thinking. That's actually what we want to do. You know, when we're engaging in education, yeah, we're dealing with young people, but we're raising adults. We're raising people to think clearly and talk clearly about bias and agendas, whether it be their own or their teachers or the textbooks or something that's come out of a large language model. So I think that's just something we want to prime up with our students. They say, hey, we need you engaging with output from a large language model in the same way that we expect you to engage with anything else, which is with a critical eye and with your brain switched on. We don't want them to be like the little baby birds where the mama bird is flying in and just dumping its guts and the little baby birds are yumming up all the... We don't want that. We want them to engage critically, and we want them to engage in a way that uses all their higher order thinking faculties. As I said, we've been training them to do that everywhere else. We just need to train them to do it with AI as well.
Yeah, you make a valid point there about the bias in textbooks. I can't think exactly what the program was that I was watching, and I think it was a comedian was talking about this in a non-comedic fashion, but was comparing the history textbooks in Germany to the history textbooks in America. Have you come across this? And said the difference with the German is that the students there are taught about their country's histories, the atrocities and obviously the victories, but the atrocities as well. They don't hide them. They feel it's important for the generation who are there to learn about them so that those mistakes, you know, they don't happen again. Whereas he said the comparison for them when they go back to America, there are so many things in American history, you know, so many bad things. And it's like, well, we'll take them out of the textbook. We won't teach about them. We won't talk about them. And I said, that's an interesting side to make, because when you think about, there's so much bias in textbooks, you know, in terms of what could be taught or what can be said and the impact that has. It's you know, is it any different then from the AI side of things in terms of the bias? So it's an interesting point, and maybe one for further discussion. I'm sure the whole idea of ethics and bias will continue on for years to come with this, won't it?
It absolutely will, and it's always worth thinking about. It's always worth thinking about when someone makes a bold claim about something. You think, well, yeah, what's it compared to? All right, so yeah, oh no, there's bias in AI. Do we run around lighting our hair on fire? We might if we examine that claim in isolation. Oh no, bias is not a good thing. What should we do? It's upon a more sober analysis where we look around, not even just look around, Alex, where we look inside ourselves too. And you need to have a sober look at yourself. Look yourself in the mirror and you'll see a multitude of biases wrestling around inside you. And you go, okay, well, I'm biased, you're biased. Every textbook that's ever been written is biased. Bias is everywhere. So, as I said, it's just a key part of our educational philosophy. We're training young children, but we're actually raising adults, and we're raising them to think clearly and critically. And it's just really important. Now, look, I think there's a danger here too, however, because I've been doing some work in schools, and specifically schools that have a Microsoft license, and people are browsing using Edge, and they're typing in the Edge browser. And what happens is then when they type in a search query, there are search results, but above the search results comes the output of a large language model. Copilot writes them a little paragraph. And it's interesting how many students will read that with a degree of implied objectivity. Okay, here's what all these people have said down here in the links, but here's the answer up here in the plain text. And you go, oh, that's really interesting that you think that. We do risk now students thinking that there is a degree of objectivity, a lack of bias in large language model output because it's being created by an algorithm and not by a person. I think it's really important to train them where that information is actually coming from, isn't it?
And they're so accustomed to it. And we are, like, when we unpack how frequently we see AI, like say Netflix. Netflix tells me what to watch. Like, I think it's me. It's not really. Like, it's Netflix recommending. Like, Spotify tells me really what to listen to. Like, in terms of podcasts, might be good to listen to. Hopefully Spotify will hear this and push me up. But there are those things, and they are so accustomed to just having recommendations given to them about things, aren't they? That when they see that at the top of a search engine or a browser, and even if you were using it, and you still see it now, even on Copilot when you use it properly, or even on Perplexity, you get your research done, you add the question, and underneath it will have 3 follow-up questions or things that it thinks you might like to know about. And so, it's important to take that step back and be able to go, actually, am I thinking for myself about this, or am I being led down a slight bit of a path? And that's a challenge, isn't it?
It's a big challenge. And the universal call that should ring out from every educator is this: don't let big tech make you a small human. Don't let big tech make you a small human, because that can so easily happen. You go, wow, I haven't had an original thought. I haven't had a single follow-up question. I haven't been staring at a blinking cursor on a blank page for so long that those muscles have now atrophied and I can't do that anymore. I'm a big fan of the idea that technology should lead us towards human flourishing, not away from it. And what we see more often is when tech becomes bigger and smarter, we get smaller and dumber. And that's certainly not my vision of human flourishing. So I think that's something we want to be really, really careful of when it comes to our students. We want to call them into a reflective practice. Say, look, how is this technology changing you? How long can you sit with a question before you ask for an answer? More than 30 seconds? More than a minute? How long have you actually been pondering or wondering or praying or doing any of these sorts of things about the questions or queries or concerns that you might have? So that's that reflective action that we need to take. How is this tech changing us? Because they're great tools, but they're terrible masters. So we need to be really, really careful about what the technology is doing to us, because there's a whole raft of scholarship and commentary on the fact that not only there's the quote out there that seemingly defies attribution, but it's that we shape our tools, and from there on, our tools shape us, right? So we need to be very, very careful about that too. And as teachers, we have a duty of care over our students. So we want to say, well, look, I'm actually very invested in how you're being shaped and formed. In fact, part of my role as an educator is to help you be shaped and formed. And so if there's an alien force or a rival force that is shaping and forming our students in ways that are undesirable or not according to the vision of our school or ourselves, we need to take that very, very seriously.
Yeah, I agree with that, because the students we have, and we're in the same generation, but even for those guys moving forward, they are a generation of content consumers. Like, we are all at that point now in terms of the devices we have, mobile phones. I think the last time I read it, it was something like 3 billion people get their news information from social media. Like 3 billion people. And that brings that concern about deep fakes, doesn't it? And talking about these challenges of consumers of potentially AI generated content, do you think it's important, and I suppose at the same time, how do we go about doing this, but that students are able to distinguish what is human-generated work from what is AI-generated work to avoid this misinformation, to avoid deep fakes? Is it going to be possible?
That's a really good question. It's a really good question. And the majority of information that our students are consuming is often images or videos. Not a lot of them are doing a lot of reading. And we're seeing that reflected in our test scores, aren't we? Like, there's not a whole lot of reading for leisure being done. It's now an oddity. In fact, I was reading, I wasn't reading, I was watching a documentary with my class. I taught a legal studies class for a year. And it was about a criminal trial where a bloke was being tried for murder in Australia. And he was sitting in the waiting room of the court reading a book. And this guy is a criminal. Like, he's killed someone. Not even allegedly. He ended up getting convicted. But he was reading a book, and the students were like, what a nerd. Can you believe this bloke? Like, he's reading a book. I said, guys, there was nothing else to do back then. Reading was the default path. If you wanted to sort of escape your situation or activate your mind, you spoke to someone, you might have read something. But now people are sort of a few notches lower than that, isn't it? They're consuming a lot of video, and they're consuming a lot of images. And actually, I'd put it to you that image generation AI and even some video creation AI is further ahead of where our text-based AI is, in terms of actually looking good, looking the part, looking like it's being created by a human. A lot of the writing that AI does is not that good. To the best of my knowledge, I've never confused AI writing with human authored writing, especially the good stuff. Good human authors are still in a league of their own, but there's good AI art that, boy, I tell you, it's pretty close, Alex. So I think it is really, really important that we're able to distinguish. Now, people like Adobe and the big movers and shakers in this space, I think they actually are quite concerned about this themselves. So there is some work being done, and I'm sure you're as aware of it as I am, in the sort of AI watermarking space. I know some of the big players, OpenAI and Adobe specifically, are looking at generating some sort of watermark so that they themselves can tell. Does that line up with what you've been seeing as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think I even saw a post about it today in terms of writers and authors being transparent with if they've done something and used AI to help and assist them, that they are making it transparent in that effect, so people can go, okay, well, you've had this team of people around you to help, and be honest with is it, I suppose it's the question of authenticity. Is it then my work? Is it not? And the students are going to have that pressure on them, aren't they? Someone is always going to question the authenticity of their work. And so to be able to have something like a watermark or something on that comes with it to show would be really, really useful. Like, even to the point now on YouTube, I don't know if you produce videos for YouTube, but when you now scroll down in YouTube, when you're uploading a video, it will ask you a question about generated content and whether what you're uploading has been generated by AI, basically.
That's really interesting. And And what it may lead us into, Alex, is a deeper species of skepticism than we've ever had before. It's funny, I was talking to another bloke recently, and he was saying there was like right back in the day, if you heard about something happening somewhere else, you would be quite skeptical. Something happening in even a suburb that you didn't have access to, or where you didn't know anyone, or a different part of the world. You just go, well, maybe that happened, maybe it didn't, I don't know. And then we moved into a space where we're able to capture images, we're even able to capture video and colour footage. And so we can go, no, I know for certain that happened. I saw the footage, I saw the video. His take was we might actually be moving back into a dark age where we go, I don't know if that happened or not. I'm not quite sure. Only because now it's going to be so easy and quick to create things like deep fakes. That just might introduce a degree of skepticism where we move back to in case, like if I didn't see it with my own eyes, I'm going to hold it with a loose grip. I'm not going to be completely sure that it happened.
Yeah, and in some ways, you've kind of got a double-edged sword, haven't you? Because on one side of it, you have the potential, everything we mentioned and we've talked about through this episode, the potential of it for educators, for students, and obviously as a teaching profession, that the potential on one side is fantastic. But then on the other side of this, as a population, not just even as students coming through, but in something they're going to inherit, as it were, on the other side of that, there is everything we've just talked about as a concern about then, well, the authenticity. How do you know if something is real? How do you know if the information you're being given is what it's meant to be? I mean, it always reminds me of that. There's an episode in The Simpsons where I just remember Homer just basically hugging the TV and just like, TV wouldn't lie. TV doesn't lie to me. And just hugging it. And it's like, let's never fight again. Because obviously what he was being told on TV was a lie or mistruth, as it were. And it's interesting for students when we watch things online that it's that just a preconceived, well, if it's on there, it must be true. Why wouldn't it be? Why wouldn't it be true? Why would it be a lie? Is that then, just thinking about this, can we teach that skill? Can we teach that type of thinking that's just beyond AI literacy? We know that's something that's going to be is important, and we're advocating for. We want more of that, and I think as we kind of come to see within curriculums, over the next years and two, we'll start to see a lot more of that embedded. But beyond that, the types of skills that we're thinking about now for students, for educators, for everyone, is that a type of skill we can teach? And if so, are there any other skills that you think are paramount that need to be taught for students to be prepared for an AI world?
I think students need to be, as I said earlier, they need to be taught the basics of using AI. And the reason that's really important is they're actually then going to understand how to spot the output. Once you start using, say, something like ChatGPT over and over and over and over, it has almost an accent, right? You can almost sort of start to see it come out. You go, well, I've spotted that. That's really, really important. So getting students to use it and then to gain a familiarity with it. Let me say this as a broader sociological commentary. Now, I'm a professional in the AI space. I'm a rank amateur in the sociology space. So make of this what you will, Alex. However, what I'm seeing really interestingly is that a lot of students seem to be actually pushing back against fake things, right? So what does that mean? That means they're actually going back to pen and paper journals when they're writing. They're going back to CDs and cassette tapes and records. They're going back to 90s fashion. They're watching DVDs of Friends. They're actually kind of sick of it. There's something within them as human beings that says, no, I don't like all this artificial stuff. I want to know that there's a human behind this. I want to know that a mind has created this. And that's where you go back to the cassette, there's no doubt. You go back to the DVDs of the things in the 90s and early 2000s, again, there's no doubt there. That definitely wasn't churned out by artificial intelligence. I don't know if you see the same thing in your school context, but I actually see it's almost this revival of the 80s and 90s in the fashion and the aesthetics, also sometimes in the technology and the technological ideals, that is a bit of a pushback against this saturation of artificial intelligence.
A little bit. in some respect, maybe the fashion side of things and demeanor, not from a tech side, not from here. Not in, I suppose, looking from a Dubai perspective in the school, like it's heavily ingrained into obviously what we do in bring your own devices and how they just learn, how they communicate. What I've interestingly seen about it is just the lack of respect or regard for the technology. And that's not necessarily, I say, thinking about monetary. What I'm thinking about is in terms of like the laptop for me, in terms of just thinking about what it can do, and just even all the tech I've got around me here, like just that appreciation and value for it, and how it makes my life, I think, enriches it. I think a lot of it I see from students is they can take it or leave it, like to the point where sometimes they'll just forget it, and it's like, man, it's all right. Or laptop, it's like, oh, I've got my laptop in my bag, but I'd rather just work with the person next to me. So there's then that idea of collaboration and connectivity in terms of, yes, we're still using it, but actually I'd rather just use one rather than get my own out. I'd rather collaborate and have those things. So it's a bit of a weird one. I always have this conversation about being scared to go and teach back in the UK, because I'm so accustomed to having technology and all the students having it there to utilize, whereas in the UK they don't. And so Dubai, and even international teaching in a lot of the countries where there is an element of wealth, but in terms of learning is reliant or heavily reliant on technology, my teaching, my pedagogical practices have shifted to accommodate those things. And I always remember training to teach in my first school. My mentor said, give it 3 years and you'll be able to teach without the book. And then after 5 years, you'll be able to answer any question. And I concern myself, I worry that those attributes for educators, if not trained still, if not worked with, will become too reliant on technology that they will forget the basic principles of how to teach. And I'll give you an example of this, and this is maybe the sadistic part of me, is basically when I then interview teachers, none of the heads have ever let me do this, but if I could get away with it, I would. I'd be like, please come and teach a lesson. But I can do one of two ways. I'd be like, oh, sorry, the technology's not working today. We've got no electricity. See what they do. Or basically just say, please come and teach a lesson for us without a laptop. Like, so you're at least kind in that respect. Like, and that's because then you know the strength of the educator in terms of, can you still do it if the electrics don't work, if the projector doesn't work, rather than, oh geez, I can't do this, I've only ever taught off a laptop. And I think from my side, those skills, I think it's coming full circle now, basics done well, are important for educators to still have.
Oh, absolutely. And there's been big debate in the educational space for the last little while. We want to move away from the sage on the stage to the guide on the side. That's words we've heard many, many a time. The thing about it, though, Alex, is it's actually pretty hard to be the sage on the stage, and it's pretty easy to be the guide on the side often. In fact, I'd say the guide on the side is a lot easier to do. Now, maybe it's not easy to do well, but it is easier to do. And it's actually quite hard. I mean, there was one point, my first year out of teacher training, I did a lot of project-based learning. Now, I'm convinced that there's some good research behind it. There's also some research that makes me now look at it in a slightly different way, and I'd be a little more concerned about rolling it out at the speed and the volume at which I did. However, the thing about it is it was really great to roll out a project-based learning project for World War I when I knew about 8 minutes worth of content for World War I. Right? It was really easy to do. And look, some very rich learning happened. But then I remember getting to the second year of teaching World War I in grade 9 history in Australia. And I thought, this should be much easier because I've done it before. And I thought, hang on, I didn't actually really teach that much. I was a great guide. I helped people formulate their inquiry questions and I helped them work on their historical skills. However, boy, I tell you what, I didn't actually learn that much myself, and I needed to. So that then took up a large part of my summer holidays that year, just going, well, I actually need to know my stuff. And so it's all very well to rip on the sage on the stage, but I tell you, it's not that easy to do. And it is something we probably want from our teachers, a level of expertise and content knowledge, which is very hard to build up. It takes a lot of time. It's what the experts that we really have are good at. And it's one of those things. Why not both? Why can't we have someone who is armed to the hilt with content knowledge, who then can take a step back and act as a guide, but they can also then be the sage when that's necessary too? It's not a forced choice. It's not a strict dichotomy. We can have both. And I share your concern, and it's something that I'm not just concerned when I look out. I was concerned when I looked within and saw it within myself. Very, very easy to get the students in and go, okay, guys, fire up your laptops. We're going to do a quick 15-minute investigation of this topic. Yeah. Tell me what you learned. And then as they're telling me, I'm going, boy, I hope this is true because I've got no way of knowing. You know what I mean?
I'm completely thinking about certain topics which I teach across A-level. My degree is human biology, and we team teach it. And my other biology teacher is a fantastic practitioner. But she's a PhD, a proper biochemist PhD. And I just you pick the topics you want to teach, and I'll pick up the slack. So for both of us who are probably more biochem and like the anatomy physiology side, I always end up with, let's say, ecosystems and biodiversity. I get to do some genetics, which I like, but I do all those things which the kids are like, ugh. Yeah. And so there's certain topics in there where I look at OneNote, which I teach off, and I'm like, oh my God, I've got so many awesome resources and tasks for these students to be going through, because basically, as it started, I didn't want to, or I didn't know the content confidently enough to stand and talk about it. And how do we overcome that? Let's make it student-centered. Which is still great. It's still great. You can facilitate, like we say, but what are you going to do when they ask you a question? Well, now I'll be like, oh, don't worry, guys, I'll find out. Let me just Google it. We'll pull it up. Let's find out together. There's the way you gloss over it. You know what? Let's find out together. Or I just pull out my phone and ChatGPT it, and it's like, oh, let's ask ChatGPT. We're learning together, aren't we? And that's me masking my own knowledge inadequacies. And so we're kind of, again, even for teachers, as much as students, we're at that tipping point of these things are great. You know, we're now talking about Rabbit, the R1 Rabbit, aren't we? These AI, assistants coming out, just having those, the glasses coming out. It's like, actually, has the value of knowledge decreased so much? Or as educators, should we still want to retain? Is there still value in us having this knowledge, not just pedagogically, but content-wise, to be better practitioners?
Absolutely. And look, you asked a question about what we need to do for our students when we're sending them off into the AI world. Like, how do we prepare them? Let me tell you the last really big idea here about preparing your students for the AI world. It's you kind of just keep teaching them everything you have been. And people go, oh, what do you mean? Like, why would I teach my students to write essays when ChatGPT can write essays? People always pick essays. I get this question all the time. I'll give you two answers to that. Firstly, writing essays, it's not about producing a kind of work. It's about producing a kind of person. Okay? It's not about I love getting students to write with their pen on a piece of paper. It's saying, actually, what do I love? I love it when students can think clearly and order their thoughts and logically order an argument. Right? So it's not about producing the work. It's about producing the kind of person that we want to see our students become. And so that's really important. Yes, okay, ChatGPT can produce the work. It can't produce the person. And so that's why I'm going to get my students to continue to write essays. The second point is, and there's a fantastic paper out there. I don't love the way it's framed because it's framed very negatively. It's by John Hattie, Dylan William, and a third bloke whose name escapes me. And it says like artificial intelligence in education, 13 things we can do to reduce the damage or something like that. I mean, what a lame way to phrase it. I would talk about maybe 13 exciting opportunities, but that's just the difference between them and me. However, they had a fantastic and very insightful graph. And what the graph showed was that if you're bad at something, chances are if you use AI, you're actually going to be worse at that thing. It's not magically going to write excellent essays for you. Who's going to get excellent essays out of AI? People who can write excellent essays anyway. So it's those skills and that knowledge which actually then they combine with AI to produce excellent output. So that's why we don't stop training people to write essays now that ChatGPT can do it. There's actually, in some ways, never been a more important time to do that. Because if we want them to be able to actually produce anything worth having out of artificial intelligence, well, they've got to be able to do it to a high standard themselves anyway.
Yeah. Aaron Hamilton was the paper. I've got it here. So Aaron Hamilton, Dylan William, John Hattie, The Future of AI in Education, 13 Things We Can Do to Minimize the Damage. So I'm going to go off and read that now. But Paul, thank you ever so much. I know it's obviously nighttime there with you, but for coming on to speak to us. If anyone is interested to learn more about the work that you're doing, the consultancy, or again, your side projects within that, where is a good place to come and find you? How can they get in contact with you?
Let me push you to 3 places. First one is LinkedIn. I use LinkedIn every day. I love it. I post every day. I love engaging. It's how you and I met. And I think there's a lot of learning that can be done. People go, oh, crumbs, how can I wrap my head around all this new stuff, all these developments? If you surround yourself with good people on LinkedIn and just have a browse for 5 or 10 minutes a day, that'll make a huge difference. So I'd love to connect with people on LinkedIn. Secondly, for my consulting and speaking, if you go to Paul Matthews, and that's Matthews with 2 T's, paulmatthews.ai, it's a great place to reach me there. And lastly, the software we've created for teachers, My Teacher Aid, the purpose is to help every educator create better resources in less time and cater for their diverse learners. If you go to My Teacher Aid, and that's AIDE.com, you can have a really good look at what we're doing there, what we are trying to achieve, and we'd love to engage with you there as well. We're also on Instagram and LinkedIn with My Teacher Aid too. Perfect. So, yeah, we'll link all those in the descriptions as well so people can come and find you. But for now, thanks again ever so much. Really, really enjoyable conversation. Some great pieces of advice and tips for educators to just get started with AI and not be scared of. So thank you ever so much for coming to talk to me today. It's been a treat, Alex, and I'm sure we'll do it again soon. Definitely. All right, you take care now.